Hi everyone, this is Dr Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. What if I told you that you could learn a huge amount about your horse's posture, comfort, and biomechanics without doing anything at all?
Just by watching them in the paddock.
The way your horse grazes, eats, even how they stand to urinate or defecate can reveal patterns of tension, compensation, and stability that often go completely unnoticed.
And the best part, this is all information your horse is offering you every single day.
Hi everyone, 3 key paddock posture observations that can completely change how you understand your horse. And of course, I'm joined by Sophie.
Hi guys.
Hello.
I love the topic of observation because once you have these skills, they are timeless and you can use them every single day. So by the end of this episode, you're going to know exactly what clues to look for when in the paddock to explore your horse's functional posture, including looking at their grazing postures, looking at their posture while they're eating hard feed, as well as their urinating and defecating positions. So you can start recognizing early signs of discomfort, imbalance, and dysfunction before they become bigger problems. And it's worth asking yourself, if you're listening, when was the last time you really just took the time to watch your horse eat? It's a valuable skill and it's time well spent. So, Raquel, what can you tell people about watching their horse while they're grazing?
Well, one of the benefits of watching a horse while they're grazing is it can just be a really nice time of connection between you and your horse. So you can actually just sit out there and chill out and see what your horse does. There's that aspect which is pretty cool. But obviously we're coming from a functional posture aspect today. So, a fair few years ago now, I was in the Netherlands and I got to observe the Konings grazing and eating, and that really changed my insight into how horses should graze, because these guys had the most beautiful grazing postures in terms of balance and flow and connection and ease, and it just looked effortless, and I'd actually never really seen a domestic horse graze like that. And then they'd move as they were grazing. They could walk and graze with their legs in a walking position, and then they go up and browse in a beautiful square position. So, when you're watching your horse just grazing in the pasture, you want to just observe them, wherever they're at. But do they walk and graze, or do they stop, graze, and then graze a bit, like all around where they can reach, and then move, and then stop and graze? So, or do they lean back on their back legs and their back legs are kind of together, but they look like they're sitting on them almost? And then often those horses will have quite a wide base of stance in their front feet. So you want to see, do they have an equal distance between their steps? Do they walk? Does their hind limbs look like they're in a comfortable, neutral position? Can they just easily tear off the grass and then either continuously graze where they're moving along, or, pick it up and graze while they're looking at something? And also in their body, what you want to see is when they're grazing, does it look like there's a flow from the jaw, through the neck, through the belly, through the back? So, the movement of the jaw is actually flowing through the rest of the body because it's all fascially connected. We've talked a lot about that. And so, does it seem effortless? And then you can also look at their jaw. So you can actually look at, it's probably easier when they're eating hard feed because they're head position, but if you're sitting on the ground and watching them graze, and it's good to look at them doing this when they've got their head down versus also doing it when they're feeding in different positions. But you can look at, how does the jaw move through its motion? And so generally it will move more, the lower jaw will move more to one side than the other. But does it go around in a motion? And also, if you look above the eyes, you should see the fat pads above the eyes going up and down. With the top of the bottom jaw, it creates that motion as it kind of pokes through the junction with the upper jaw. So you want to look at those things and see, does it look balanced? Does it sound balanced? We could just talk about the jaw, but we're talking today about posture. So kind of jump back in to those postures. But yeah, when was the last time you just stopped and watched them in the paddock, or you watched them eat their hard feed and actually observed them to the end to see what they did there? I'm observing my horses eating all the time. I probably don't observe them that much at pasture because I need to take more time just to chill out and hang with them. But I always am observing how they're eating out of their hay nets and then how they're eating their hard feed and their standing position. So what kind of hard feed, like when their horses are eating their hard feed, what kind of things can you observe in those postures?
Yep. So it's going to be a little bit different too if you're grazing out in pasture. Number one, because you've got the difference between the walking as opposed to just standing still. And sometimes where you're feeding them from. So it depends on whether you're feeding them at ground height or an upper height. If they're eating from the ground, it's probably less likely that they're going to be, dead square. But even if they were from the ground, it would be nice to see them be nearly equal, in that position. So you want to be asking yourself, is my horse standing straight or are they on an angle? If you've got a horse who always chooses to be on an angle, why is this? Like, have you positioned them on a hill, whether you've realized it or not, and they're adjusting to accommodate for the hill? Or do they always like to position themselves in a certain way? There's one adjustment center I go to. It's quite funny. They feed their horses in a paddock all the way along a rail, but it's on the back of a shed. And when you turn up, all of them are spread out, but they're all parallel to the rail, like they're standing against the rail, and everybody takes a bite and then they look out at the paddock. So they like to be able to see out behind them. So
yeah,
and I remember coming and being like,
that
why?
same position every single day, which is creating a pattern within those horses.
And so, and everybody, I turned up and I was like, oh, I thought they were all tied up, but they were all eating from their tubs along this rail where somebody had tipped the food in, and they want to see out at the paddock rather than staring at the blank wall. So they've all positioned themselves. So do they stand straight or are they always on an angle? Do they knock the feeder off? So the most profound case of this that I've seen that's perfect is your horse, Raquel. I was at Raquel's house and her young horse, Ellie, I was helping feed, so I put the feed bucket on the rail and Ellie knocked it off so perfectly that only one side of the feeder hung off, so it was on an angle. And I thought it was an accident. So I put it back on and she immediately took it back off. And I remember looking at you and you were like, yeah, she's smart. She's putting it in exactly the position she wants to be in. So they're super aware. Do they knock the feeder off or do they leave it like that? Limb positions, square. Do they always have one forward and one back? So if you see, particularly in foals, it can be really pronounced, but older horses as well, they can have what we call a split stance, where the front legs are really far apart, and that allows them to get down to the ground. And it's a sign of dysfunction, realistically, in the neck, in the rib cage, and the connection between the scapula to the body. And the more they stand like that, the more you build muscle and structure that
neural pathways.
Yeah, neural pathways that are representative of that position. So is there always a limb that's offloading or resting behind as well is a good question to ask. So it's just, is the horse loading evenly between all of their front legs? Another one to ask is, do they finish their food, or do they eat it all in one go or walk around a little bit? Do they chew in the same position as their feed or put their head higher and lower? All of those things are important information, not just, for gut comfort. Another one, do they finish their food? How do they feel in their tummy? That's going to be really important for posture, and also whether they eat it all in one go or walk around a little bit. So that can be, how does my mouth feel? How does my jaw? I feel like jaw is a strong theme today. We're going to have to do an episode on the jaw.
Yeah.
But, thinking about, why is my horse eating a little bit and then going away and then coming back? And if they're chewing in the same position as their feet or putting their head higher or lower, is that because they are more comfortable in that position? So if the horse is taking a bite from their feed and then they sort of put their head out and it drops lower, is that because they weaken their forehand and they really need to sink forward through their thoracic sling? That's a more comfortable position for them because they're kind of weak there. Or do they have upper neck tension, and so it's really not functional for them or comfortable for them to be kind of stretched out, or to be having to, some of the feeders are not very ergonomic. And so when they're flat on the rail, the horse has to kind of create this flexed upper head and neck position to get their head in, and also often twist. And so they'd rather just take their head out in between actually grabbing the food so that they can chew it in a normal position. And if you notice that, making an accommodation so that they have some kind of bucket or system that isn't causing them to go into a dysfunctional posture, because anything that we do reinforces a system of movement. And so you're trying to, we want to improve their posture through using the very best posture that they have the whole time that they're eating and chewing. Because all of the input to your body, we adapt to the influences. So that's the way that we move, it's the way that we chew, it's the way that we stand. All of that pressure is coming through our bones, it's coming down through our feet. That's why you see changes in the hoof capsule depending on the way that the horse is loading. So everything that you do is influencing the body. Other things to look at when your horse is eating their hard food: limb or tail motions, picking up a forelimb. Is it really difficult for them to pick up a forelimb while they're eating? If it is, it shouldn't be super difficult for your horse to just pop up one front leg if you ask them, and be able to balance on the other three. Did you have any extra comments about that?
Yeah. When I was saying picking up a forelimb, I also meant them picking up their forelimb when they're eating. So, there's two things there. One, are they able to balance while they're eating and pick up a leg? But the other aspect of it too is, do they constantly do this? Where they're picking up the leg and shaking it round? Because, people have said, oh, that's so cute. They're lift up their little leg when they're hungry, or he always does that. He's just excited about his food. But what I've observed is that when horses get in a comfortable position, they stop doing that. And so Henry's a big one for it, and it's always his right front leg. And that's the side that, from his neck dysfunction, that he likely gets nerve pain in that right front leg. It's the leg that will buckle on him. Sometimes it's his more upright foot. It's the leg that he kind of acts like he has nerve pain in. So they should happily stand on all four legs without obviously resting one or the other. And, my horses do graze square. So, they can graze square, but they've done postural feeding for a lot of time. And Henry and Jelly will both stand at their hard feeds square most of the time, unless something is going on. And Ellie as well. Ellie still likes to not be straight, but it could be related to her feeder because she has a big feeder. It'll be interesting for me to change her feeder and see And she does have the habit now of knocking it off, but she gets a very small amount of food in a very big feeder. So, yeah, just they
Are they
shouldn't
eating
kind of
from
stomp a
the
limb or
ground?
pick up a limb or shake it around.
Are they eating from a higher position or from the ground, their hard feeds?
From a higher position, but even when I lower it down, they'll stay square. Yeah. So I think horses should be able to stand square and go either or front leg forward, depending. Like, there shouldn't be a preference so much. And the other thing is, like, if they, if they seem really grumpy when they're eating, then that could be that it's uncomfortable for them when they're eating. And so, they're grumpy not because their food, like, obviously you do get some horses that are can be a bit food aggressive and things, but it could be that it's just not comfortable, but they still really want to eat the food. I had a horse I treated a few years ago, and he would, one of her complaints was that he would not finish all of his food, and he'd get a mouthful, a big kind of uncontrolled mouthful, and then he'd pick up his head and eat it higher than where the feeder was, and he'd drop a lot of food as well, and he'd had his teeth checked, and there was no dental reasons for him to be dropping food. And when I palpated his hyoid and his omohyoid muscle, it was so restricted. His whole neck was super stiff. He couldn't put his tongue out. So the other thing she'd noticed is when he took a treat from her, he would like use his lips. I think we've talked about this before. He'd use his lips to like get the treat. He didn't have that tongue control. And so and he also didn't have a big excursion through his jaw. So after treating his hyoid, he ate normally. He stopped dropping food. He ate just with his head down in his bowl. He cleaned up his whole bowl, and he was way less grumpy. So, and then he got improved neck motion, improved head position, and all of those things. So it can really give you a lot of information. I'm constantly just observing, going, oh, yay, that looks good tonight. Oh, God, what's going on there? So you can just pick it up, you don't have to even touch them, and you get so much information just observing and then looking at how they're balanced in these feeding positions. Yeah, what about like the next thing is urination and defecation? That can give us so much information. So what about urination?
So urination has a normal posture, and that is the ability to stretch out both legs behind. They stretch out their two front legs forward a little bit, and usually widen their back legs. And so the questions we want to ask are the front legs square when they move them forward a little bit? Do they rest on a toe? So with one of the hind limbs, do they sort of cock it to the side a little bit and relieve loading through that limb? And it's important, when they stretch out both hind legs, you're extending through your hock, stifle, and hip. So, the stifles are often represented when they can be uncomfortable. The horse will often offload that leg. And another question to ask yourself for urination is, when do they urinate? Do they always urinate after work? I know you have a story about Jelly, but it's very valuable information because, is your horse holding on to their wee rather than saying, yep, I need to go while you're riding? So is it uncomfortable for them while you're on their back or while you have the saddle on? Or are they sort of getting irritation from work that's stimulating their bladder and saying, yep, I definitely need to go now? So it's an important question to ask.
Yeah, like Jelly used to urinate before and after work every time. And Yeah, he doesn't do that now. Like, he always urinates before he comes into the yard at night for his dinner. Like, that's a thing that's his little routine that he does. But he doesn't urinate after I work him. Like, it's normal now. But he had a lot of psoas issues, gelding scar problems, and muscle irritation with his muscle condition. So, at his top line. So, yeah, they really shouldn't do that. And also I had another horse that I treated, and he was a thoroughbred, and he could not stretch out to pee. So one of the she'd never, in the time that she'd had him, I think 6 months or something, she'd never seen him like stretch out and do a complete wee. And so when I assessed him, he was so sore, and especially around his stifles. After the first session, I think it was, he went and had a wee.
Okay.
She was like, oh my God, that's the first time he's been able to have a more complete wee in 6 months. So, you know, like when they're really sore, and especially if their stifles are painful, you'll see they keep the stifle flexed, and then they'll, like kind of come up on their toes or put their legs at a weird angle in order to not extend through the stifles or hogs. Or the other one they'll do is really flex their hips, like their pelvis. They'll really flex the pelvis. And then that allows them to kind of spread the legs without extending the legs, but it looks like the pelvis is too flexed. Some horses really do not like getting pee on their legs. So you do need to be mindful that sometimes they do the posture because they do not want to get splashed. And if Jelly had an option, he would choose to wee in the hay or anywhere where he doesn't get splashed. So you do need to keep that in mind and observe your horses in areas where there is no splashing so that you can see if there is a difference there. So that's really important. Obviously, geldings and mares are a bit different because the urine's coming out of different places in terms of how they might stand, but it still should look comfortable and easy and effortless, and they get in and out of the position reasonably quickly. Like, they don't stay in the position for a really long time, and they don't take ages to get into position. And with a gelding, we'd like to see that the willy comes out and that you don't have a horse urinating with the willy in, and then all that urine is... I've had a couple of horses like that where they're not having the willy come out, and then I've had other horses where the willy's been kind of out too much, not just in urination. So, yeah, that whole process of, the urination from start to finish gives you so much information, as does defecation.
Yes.
So I'll just talk about Jelly with the defecation, and then you can go into some of the other stuff, because Jelly's defecation gives me a lot of information about where he's at on the day. And so if he's never defecated perfectly straight since I've had him. And what he used to do was basically his front legs would be under his belly, like a fair way under, and then his right leg is always out a bit to the side, and they go very kind of wide, and then he lifts his lumbar up, and it's just like it's an effort. And so I know when everything is functioning well, because his front legs are not under his body like that, and he can stay fairly symmetrical, like it doesn't look so awkward. And when I know he's really good, he can poo when he's moving. And then I'm like, oh, we're in a great place at the moment. If he just offers to poo, especially if I'm on him, that would be like amazing, because the comfort through his lumbar, and then I think from his muscle condition causing so much damage within his psoas muscles and things, that defecation process is quite shows me quite a lot about his body, so it's really useful. What can people look at with that defecation?
So looking for lumbar flexion. So when your horse goes to pass some manure, having a look at their back and seeing, is it able to lift and round? And that's all the way, it's the lumbar, but also into your lumbosacral. So looking across that area and just seeing, can they lift, and does it sort of only come through, the lumbosacral area? Is it kind of, once you hit the mid back, it's just totally rigid and it doesn't change at all. So it should really be able to lift and round, and it should be smooth. So they should gently come up, and then they should be able to hold it while they pass manure, and then it should gently come back down again. And it should be a smooth and comfortable motion. Tail motion and position, it should be easy for them to move their tail out of the way. It shouldn't be, look uncomfortable, and they should be able to clear it as well. When people tell me, oh, this horse is, lazy, he always gets poo in his tail, I would be more suspect about their comfort in their tail and around their sacrum.
Yeah.
And moving that tail out of the way, because no one likes to have poo in their tail.
The same with
And
wee from that sense as well. Like if they're always weeing on their tail, it's like, well, why are they always weeing on their tail? Like why are they not getting that tail out of the way to not urinate on it? So yeah, it's the same for both.
Yeah. And then of course groaning and grunting. Like if you're hearing that that they're holding a lot of brace, if you're hearing groaning and grunting trying to pass manure. If you heard that sound coming out of, a human bathroom, you'd be very concerned, and it's just not a normal thing to be happening. So defecation can tell you a lot about lumbosacropelvic function and just that whole area, because, the pelvis does have to, inside has to shift, and you have to be able to create pressure in order to pass the manure, like your abdominal tension and internal pressure passing, as well as, that rounding through the back. So making that lumbosacropelvic area for urination and defecation is very important for both, extension and then flexion. And so if your horse has an issue with one but not the other, then that can give you information to share with your body worker and your vet. But it's a very basic function to be able to poo and wee properly. So it's important for them to be able to do so.
Yeah, definitely. So you want to just, observe your horse, and then, but in terms of like what ideal postures are, what we'd like to see when your horse is grazing, is that they can walk and graze, that they sometimes might be square, they have no preferred leg, they don't have a big wide split stance, and they don't look like they're grazing around a position. They're just comfortably grazing where they're grazing, and they also don't, they also can chew with their head low, or if they happen to look up at something, either or, it's easy. When they're having their hard feed, that they're straight, that they're able to line up straight if it's on a gate or something, that they're balanced, that they have that even weight distribution between all four legs, that they can keep their head in the bucket comfortably, that they don't need to like pick it up, like what Sophie said, and chew lower or higher than the bucket, that they can finish all their food, and that they're just able to be calm and relaxed when eating their hard feed, and that we be careful not to make excuses like, oh, well, he just doesn't like it, or, he loves his food, or, that we kind of anthropomorphize a bit how they're eating, because often it's more postural comfort than necessarily how much they love or hate it. I mean, some horses, they do that. Ellie, sometimes if she thinks that I've made it up completely wrong, she will throw the food bucket, off the fence and down on the ground. Like, it's not just a little taking the hook off. It's like the whole bucket gets thrown and tells me, well, this is not how my feed normally is. So there is definitely, they do that, but they shouldn't do that all the time. So really thinking about that. What about urination and defecation? What should people see?
So ideally, you're going to have front legs square with no part of the body appearing strained or braced. So it should look like an easy posture to be in. And the hind feet and hind limbs should be balanced in their loading with good extension, so stretching out through all of the limbs. And the pelvic position flows nicely from the body and isn't overly flexed. So, you know, their bum hasn't sort of tucked under too severely. And yeah, the tail needs to be out of the way as well, like we were saying for defecation, to have clearance from the wee so that it can, whether it's going to the left or the right. Yeah. And so for defecation, it should be easy. They should be able to be calm and relaxed. The tail should lift easily and symmetrically, no groaning or grunting. And the abdominals should contract without bracing and without a big tension line up the side, like a heave line. So that should be an easy motion. And again, they should be able to be square and easily balanced while passing manure. And ideally, be able to continue moving as they do so. So, yeah, when it's easy, all of those postures look easy, and changes give you an early indicator of imbalance in their posture, and that gives you a lot of opportunity to create a picture of your horse. So, you know, if you were to use the information in this podcast episode, you can go out and say, okay, I've seen this in my horse. You know, they're really not looking very when let's say when your horse goes to do a wee and you notice, okay, the right hind leg, they kind of tip off to the side and they've gone up on their toe and they've left that limb a bit unloaded. And then you go to feed your horse and you see, okay, he stands square for 5 minutes, but then he offloads his right hind or he tucks it underneath his body. And then when you're out in the pasture, you see that they're resting and again, they've offloaded that limb. Or they haven't while they're moving around. Or, you know, I personally, when Charlie and Randy are playing, I always see when they rear up, his right hind is always slightly more buckled than the left. I've got it in photos. I see it all the time. And even when he's feeling good, it's the one part of him that he's like, oh, I'm going to look after that. And so these are the things that you match together to make a picture. And so that's one example, but you might see other things. You know, you'd be like, okay, my horse, actually, when he eats, we've got a big, strong split stance, and that left fore always goes forward and out to the side. And when I lift his food up, he scratches at the ground with that leg. And when he goes forward into his wee posture, he tucks it in behind the other front leg rather than being square. So when it comes to making a picture, that's how you can just make observations in different places and bring them together. And you never have to feel like it's not worth mentioning. You can just always mention it to your body worker or to your vet, and just think, you know, does this have meaning? It nearly always does. And just investigate and see what changes and what doesn't change.
Yeah, it gives you that baseline to work with. Like if you, the more things that you can observe, then the more you'll be able to notice if things change. And so having that kind of baseline of where your horse is at now, like when we're doing the functional posture course, like people in the first week, they're getting a baseline. How does their horse urinate? How does their horse defecate? How does their horse graze? How do they just stand when they're just standing in the paddock? Because they're the things that we want to change, because you can optimize your horse's posture in work and think that you're creating this big change because they always stop square when you're working them, or they, you know, always do certain things when you're working them. But if those postures do not carry through to your paddock postures and, like, you know, improve posture when they're urinating, defecating, eating, standing, if you're not improving the foundations and it's not holding through there, then you're not really creating change that's getting rewired into the new movement pathways and system. Like, you want to see that whatever you do in your work transfers over into the paddock, and then it holds, when you're not doing the work. That's even better when they have a week or two off and their postures are still fabulous, or they have 3 months off and their postures are still fabulous, or, that's gives us so much information. So yeah, we can't kind of reiterate that enough. Observe your horses in the paddock all the time, and you will gain so much information. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler, and Sophie Vandenberg in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating so we can share more valuable insights. Reach out with any listener requests for topics you'd like to hear us talk about. And if you're a business aligned with our mission, reach out to become a sponsor of the podcast.
And we'll see you in the next exciting episode.